No clear winner in Uruguay's presidential runoff vote. Distinguished Trinidadian prison reform activist passes away. And Russia and China joined South Africa for joint naval exercises. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez in Quito, and this is from the South. With 100% of votes counted in Uruguay's runoff presidential election, the result is a technical draw. The right-wing National Party candidate Luis Lacalle Pou has said he's won and reportedly leads the broad front candidate Daniel Martinez by 28,600 votes. However, Martinez has stressed the need to wait until all ballots are counted. Special votes are being still counted, and the country's next president is expected to be announced later in the week. The Progressive Broad Front coalition have governed Uruguay for 14 years. However, Lacalle Pou managed to unite 5 conservative opposition parties for the runoff vote.
Obviously, in the absence of acceptance of the government candidate conceding the vote, the president and us will find out what will happen in a few days when the court formally says that the multicolor coalition won this election on November 24.
What's clear in this election, which some expected to end up differently, is that the party that wins, the president-elect, will in no case reach 50%. They tried to bury us. What they didn't know is that we are the seed.
Our correspondent in Montevideo, Mateo Grille, has the latest.
The difference between the candidates Daniel Martinez and Lacalle Pou is so small that it's necessary to wait until Friday for the Electoral Court to make a final declaration on who is the president-elect and who will become president of Uruguay. Today, it's still the case that the difference is around 28,000, and there are 35,000 special votes yet to be counted. That's going to be happening over the coming days. Regional councils will be counting these votes. They have to be counted with the presence of delegates from both political parties. It's going to be interesting, with the count changing vote by vote. The distance is minimal, but at the same time, there are very few votes left to count with regard to what could change. It's very unlikely that Daniel Martinez will become president of the Republic. And it's almost a fact that Lacalle Pou has won the election. But we're going to have to wait for that to be confirmed.
That was Mateo Grille from Uruguay. Thousands of Colombians continue to protest against the neoliberal reforms proposed by the government of President Ivan Duque, in spite of harsh measures against them. Protesters mobilized despite the curfew in Bogotá, the militarization of the streets, and the repression of peaceful demonstrators. Caving to the pressure, Duque has proposed a national dialogue to pacify the education, indigenous and health sectors that led the protests. He will meet with the newly elected governors and mayors who will begin their tenure on January 1st to include them in the talks. Thousands of citizens have been mobilizing since last Thursday to reject the repressive tactics of the police special forces. Meanwhile, denounced as an act of xenophobia, the Colombian government has blamed unrest on Venezuelans. In an effort to deny popular resistance to its neoliberal reforms, the government of Ivan Duque deported 59 Venezuelans on the grounds of national security. Our correspondent in Bogotá, Hernan Tobar, has the latest.
This is the 5th day of demonstrations against Ivan Duque's neoliberal measures. Today, high school students all over Colombia will bang pot and pans in protest. The Central Workers Union has also called for a march against violence against women. Until now, there has been one protester severely injured by riot police. He is hospitalized and his condition is serious. Human rights organizations have condemned the excessive use of force by the special policing body. In fact, one of the march's demands is to remove this squad from the police. Meanwhile, during a meeting with President Ivan Duque, Medellin's new mayor Daniel Quintero requested a new National Constituent Assembly in order to allow the country to move beyond the social crisis that the country is facing.
Our correspondent in Tobar. Bolivia's de facto government has enacted the Exceptional and Transitional Regime Law for holding the general elections. On Sunday, the Bolivian Congress approved the law which was signed by Senator and self-proclaimed President Janine Áñez. The law recognizes the participation of all political organizations except for those who have been re-elected in 2 previous terms. This ultimately disallows President Evo Morales and his Vice President Álvaro García Linera from participating. The Supreme Electoral Tribunal now has a maximum 20-day term to elect new members in order to set a date for the general elections in Bolivia by 2020. Meanwhile, Áñez denied a law that will protect members of the movement towards socialism from political persecution. And the people who were massacred by police in Sencata El Alto have been laid to rest. Last Friday, protesters blocked access to the fuel depot in Sencata. Armed forces in helicopters killed at least 9 people and injured more than 30. Relatives of the deceased have spoken to the representatives of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, denouncing the use of violence by the armed forces controlled by the de facto government.
Just then, the military showed up and they started shooting. I saw a young man who was shot in the back of the neck. I wanted to catch him, but he was shot in the head. By the moment I tried to catch him, they started to shoot at me, and I ran away. But while I running, I was shot in the heel. I asked for justice for all the wounded, for all the dead. It is not right that they do this to us.
In Dominica, Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit has denounced interference and sponsored by the Organization of American States to delegitimize upcoming general elections. Skerrit denounced attempts by the OAS to interfere in the internal affairs of the island, rejecting attempts to generate violent acts within the country intended to harm the December 6 general elections. This comes after the OAS Secretary General Luis Almagro said that free and fair elections would not be held in Dominica, and this is what Skerrit responded.
Those elections will be free and fair despite your lies, despite your nastiness, despite your attempts to sow seeds of destruction, and despite your attempt to have outside meddling. And we say, hands off Dominica.
PM Skerrit also accused the opposition's United Workers' Party, led by Lennox Linton, of trying to execute a coup with the assistance of the OAS.
There are dangerous forces at work in this region, forces that want to change governments. And once they get the ideological puppets in place, they do not care what happens to the people in the country after. Linton is trying to provoke breakdown here so he can bring in these same foreigners to help him take over. He is appealing to the OAS for help. He wants to bring about a change of government without facing the polls. And that is a coup, ladies and gentlemen.
Meanwhile, the chairman of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States and Antigua's Prime Minister Gaston Brown is questioning the practicality of implementing electoral reform in Dominica. Brown says there is no constitutional crisis in Dominica, while he suggests it would not be practical to have electoral reform with less than 2 weeks to the country's general elections. Antigua's leader says he doesn't believe it's practical to extend elections beyond December 6th because, according to him, if the polls go beyond the 5-year constitutional requirement, then a crisis could ensue. Still to come, is a Scotiabank solution closer in the Caribbean? We'll find out just in a minute.
Innovation, science, the technological breakthrough, and its influence in society.
Viajeros del saber, el futuro está aquí.
Atomism. Monday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back, and let's continue with news. One of Trinidad and Tobago's most passionate advocates for prison reform has passed away. Wayne Chance, the founder of NGO Vision on Mission, died of cancer on Sunday evening. He was the recipient of several distinguished awards, including the Hummingbird Silver in 2010 for community service. Chance was a former inmate who turned his life into a mission for ex-convicts. He provided temporary shelter and aftercare for thousands of former inmates who society would have otherwise discarded. Chance's experience behind bars and his advocacy for improvements to the prison system made him a significant force in his country. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley has extended his condolences. In a statement, the Prime Minister describes Chance as a leading light of useful activism. Rowley lauded Chance's creation of Vision on Mission, which he says helped many people and in doing so saved the nation from totally discarding many of those who ran afoul of the law and paid their dues after having been sentenced. Prime Minister Gaston Brown is promising a positive solution to issues surrounding the planned sale of Scotiabank branches in Antigua and Barbuda. Trinidad-based Republic Bank Holdings is seeking to acquire Scotiabank operations in several Caribbean countries. But Antigua had expressed reservation about the proposed sale, saying it was interested in buying the island's Scotiabank's holdings itself, alongside a local consortium. The Canadian-owned financial institution has more than $1 trillion in assets, while Antigua's GDP is just $1.5 billion. However, after meeting with bank officials, Prime Minister Brown says he's confident the matter will be settled in a few weeks and to the satisfaction of all stakeholders. The PM adds that a major announcement will follow. Chile's President Sebastián Piñera has announced that he will bring a new bill to Congress that will grant impunity to security forces who are accused of killing and violently repressing demonstrators. He also says that there will be an additional 4,300 policemen on the streets in the next 60 days.
This week, we are sending a bill to the Congress that will allow our armed forces, without the need for a state of emergency or restricting citizens' rights, to protect the critical infrastructure of our country, such as the water, electrical supply mechanisms, and much more. This is to guarantee that vital services function.
Our correspondent, Leonel Retamal, has an update on the situation in Chile.
We're outside the Supreme Court, where several organizations are presenting a denunciation of human rights abuses to prevent other abuses of protesters as seen in recent weeks, as well as to protect the right to protest. Since the number of wounded, tortured, disappeared and sexually abused has increased, the strike continues in several cities, including Santiago, joined by the port workers and feminist organizations. November 25th is the day against violence towards women. Protesters continue to demand better social conditions in health, education and living standards. They're calling for a general strike tomorrow in the main cities, demanding more participation in a constituent assembly and that their voices are heard. We will also see the reaction by social organizations to the announcement made by the President Sebastián Piñera that will maintain the militarization of the streets.
That was our correspondent, Leonel Retamal from Chile. Let's continue with other news. We go to Brazil now. Congresswoman Gleisi Hoffmann has been re-elected as the leader of the Workers' Party. Among her goals for her new mandate are leading the opposition against the country's far-right president and creating an economic alternative to neoliberalism. Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Brian Mir, has more details.
In Sao Paulo, Brazil, the 7th National Brazilian Workers' Party, or PT Congress, has just come to an end, and the delegates present re-elected Paraná Congresswoman Gleisi Hoffmann as the party president. She'll serve for another 4 years now, and it's meaningful that she was re-elected because she represents some of the farther left internal caucuses within the party, such as Democratic Socialists and the socialist movement of PT, Avante. She attended Nicolas Maduro's inauguration in January. She's a strong supporter of the Venezuelan people, of Bolivian socialism and other left movements in the global south. Now, during the Congress, the delegates present also deliberated on what the priorities should be for the party for the next 4 years. Now, some of these priorities include creating an alternative economic development plan to neoliberalism, halting the advance of neo-fascism, creating electoral plans to win the highest number of seats in the 2020 mayoral and city council elections, and getting all charges against former President Luis Inácio Lula da Silva reversed.
Brian Muir from Brazil. Mexico's National Commission for Human Rights will be led for the first time by a woman. Rosario Piedra Ibarra is committed to transform this institution, as she is the sister of someone who was forcibly disappeared.
The disappearance of people is a phenomenon that sees no end in Mexico. Since over a year ago, Lucas Avendaño, an anthropologist and artist, has been on a mission to find his brother. A difficult task in a country where there are 40,000 cases of disappeared people since 2006.
The Interior Ministry has changed the person in charge of these cases 5 times already. Whoever takes over needs between 2 and 4 months to catch up with the files. So every time it happens, we are set back.
To find Bruno, he's appealed to numerous governmental institutions in the state of Oaxaca. He hopes the case will move forward in the National Commission for Human Rights with the arrival of Rosario Piedra Ibarra as the new head of the commission.
I have the support of all collectives, of victims, of civil association, of people who have been fighting for their rights for many years, not just of people who have been forcibly disappeared, but also environmentalists, of migrant defenders, and of journalists.
During her first meeting with the press, Piedra Ibarra said that she will work with all sectors of society, even those who oppose her, as she will need all the help she can get to advance with the numerous investigations.
In cases where the Commission made recommendations, they were left as such. We need to find legal mechanisms so that our recommendations are executed, and if they are not, to find ways to extract pressure.
President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has supported Piedra Ibarra's appointment and has compromised to lower cases of human rights violations during his term in office, especially by the armed forces.
They are doing a great effort so that this very important institution can guarantee public security without any violation of human rights.
Over Mexico's last 2 administrations, the Army and the Navy were among the organizations with the most complaints against them for violating human rights. Just between 2006 and 2012, under President Felipe Calderón, there were more than 9,000 complaints against them.
After the break, doctors warn of a risk to WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange's life. Don't go away.
A review of the world news that investigates, incites analysis, and induces criticism, because every event has a context.
Pusimos el punto en la I.
Dot in the I. Saturdays, only on Telesur.
The South African Navy is playing host to China and Russia for a joint maritime exercise just off the Cape Town coast. The first to arrive in the Cape Town harbor was the Russian cruiser Marshal Ustinov. A small crowd welcomed the Chinese People's Liberation Army frigate Wei Fang. The exercise is the first of its kind between the three countries and is scheduled for this coming week. The operation is focused on economic security, interoperability, and maintaining good relations between the participating navies. The theme is promotion of safe navigation and maritime economic security. One of the key objectives is the training of a multinational task organization to counter security threats at sea. The Sidama ethnic group, which represents 4% of Ethiopia's 105 million population, has voted overwhelmingly to form their own self-governing region. According to the country's electoral board, provisional results show that 98.5% of voters backed the change in Wednesday's ballot, with the turnout reaching 99.7%. This will make Hawassa City Ethiopia's 10th self-governing region. Residents will now control taxes, education, security, and certain legislation.
The election has ended peacefully, and that is a good thing. Every ethnicity that lives in the Sidama zone and Hawassa City should coexist peacefully and with respect for each other.
The Navy has declared the results of the referendum across polling stations in Sidama zone. The election outcome indications show the long-standing Sidama struggle has been successfully achieved.
An international group of 65 doctors has written an open letter detailing that incarcerated WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange could die in prison if his health problems are not addressed urgently. Assange is currently in Belmarsh prison in the United Kingdom. The 48-year-old faces the threat of deportation to the United States, where he is wanted for releasing information on U.S. war crimes in Iraq. The doctors call for him to be moved to a university hospital. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture recently said that Assange's continued exposure to arbitrariness and abuse may soon cost him his life. University teachers have begun an 8-day strike in the United Kingdom over pay and working conditions. The University and Colleges Union says that staff have reached breaking point on a number of issues, including the gender pay gap, pension changes that will see staff pay more and receive less upon retirement, and growing workloads. Educators at 43 universities are participating in the strike action. The Latin American conference, Adelante, has taken place in the United Kingdom. The meeting aims to set new agendas and discuss common challenges faced by leaders across the region. Our correspondent in London, Pablo Navarrete, has more.
Here in the centre of London, hundreds have gathered for the annual Latin America conference, the biggest conference in solidarity with Latin America in Europe. We've heard numerous speakers talk about the need for solidarity with the region in the face of coups in places like Bolivia. There have been workshops on the misrepresentation of the reality of Latin America today in the British media and in other English-speaking media. Earlier on, a message from Lula was read out to the conference, where he gave his salutations to those here and also gave an update about what was taking place in Brazil and elsewhere in Latin America. There was also a video conference with Noam Chomsky, who offered his assessment of developments in countries like Chile. So there have been many workshops dealing with issues of labor rights in Colombia, the issue of the peace process, the coup in Bolivia, the need for solidarity with countries such as Venezuela, and hundreds of academics, journalists, and social movement members have gathered here to express solidarity with Latin America.
From the UK, Pablo Navarrete. The last election in Spain saw the country's most territorially divided parliament since the end of the Francisco Franco dictatorship. Regional political forces are now key to President Pedro Sanchez to form a government.
Spain is comprised of many nations, and this was clear in the vote on November 10th. Regional sovereignty and nationalist parties won 12% of the seats in Spain's Congress. These are the parties pushing for greater regional autonomy and control over resources, and even independence from Spain.
The growth in support for regional parties emphasized the need to redefine the territorial model in place since the transition to democracy. The statutes of autonomies, it needs to be revised.
The vote for regional parties has made it difficult to form a majority government, as agreements are needed with many political actors. Regional parties are calling for greater sovereignty, control over local resources, and the release of funds from the central government for infrastructure. The advantage of a large electoral pact is that it would improve a territorial framework that is in crisis, as evidenced by the political situation in Catalonia.
The state has a problem. It has many problems, but the most important one is territorial configuration. There is no majority in the parliament, and the Basque Nationalist Party is going to play an important role in the future. We will work for a solution and an opportunity for the different needs across Spanish territory.
Everything suggests that most regionally focused parties will support a progressive coalition, due to support for the decentralization of the Spanish state.
Any kind of decentralization will be supported by progressive governments. The progressive governments are friends of decentralization, and conservative governments are friends of the Unitarianism of the recentralization of the state. It's a matter of looking particularly at regionalist parties, and most of them will enter the coalition based on this logic.
The Left Republic of Catalonia party has asked its members whether they should offer their support to form a new government in Madrid. Together for Catalonia and the Popular Unity candidacy have made it clear they won't vote in favour if they receive no assurances over dialogue while their political and civic leaders remain imprisoned.
With that, we end our news brief, but you can find all of our stories by checking our website, telesurenglish.net. And for our viewers in Africa, you can find us on Starsat channel 461 in South Africa and 539 in Nigeria. And be sure to also follow us on social media. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.
Innovation, science, the technological breakthrough, and its influence in society.
Viajeros del saber, el futuro está aquí.
Atomen.